Hi again then guys, and welcome to another installment of the Automotive News Roundup, and this is a very spicy vehicle that we're talking about today, certainly a vehicle that I have a lot of interest in. Design-wise, it's not one of my favourite Koenigsegg's, I will say that, but we can get more into that in a second. But for the important stuff first, this is a car which, if I recall correctly, Koenigsegg actually referenced a number of years ago, and that is that they would be trying to make a four-seater version of their kind of ideology when it comes to exotics, and a couple of other manufacturers, Lamborghini for instance with the Estacade, Bugatti with the Galibia, have made four-seater concepts before. Four-seater, four-door supercars, if you will, but they don't reach production, or at least very rarely. This one, though, is going to be different, because they are going to produce it, and this is the first look, if you will, at what the car is going to be like, with probably a couple of minor cosmetic changes when you actually see production. Now, the car is called the Gemera, and even though it could easily be overshadowed by the ultimate version of the Jesko that they've announced as well, which of course is a much more Koenigsegg thing, you'd expect a car like that to come out, this one actually intrigues me far more because it's so different. And as many of you know, Unsung Heroes, even my top 100 favourite car list on YouTube, I like things that are different. And in terms of the sheer spec, don't be fooled by the four seats. This is not a watered-down version of a Koenigsegg by any means. It actually puts out some of the best numbers that Koenigsegg has ever had, especially if you're talking torque. Now, the car has all-wheel drive, technically, with torque vectoring, like a Rimac. It puts out 1,700 horsepower combined, and an even more impressive 2,600 pound-feet of torque. The performance is, well, Koenigsegg level, 0 to 60 under 2 seconds, and a top speed of 248 miles an hour. Now, I'm not exactly sure if that's with a limiter, or if that is the true top speed. A limiter wouldn't surprise me at all, and there's always been something that I've quite liked about the speed 248, it just has a nice ring to it, but some people might think, well, that doesn't actually sound that great for a Koenigsegg. They're now doing 280, they're aiming for 300, why make a car that's so much slower? In fact, barely quicker than the CCX was over a decade ago. Well, the reason why is actually fairly simple, and it has nothing to do with marketing. It has everything to do with engineering, because the way this car is set up is not about pure speed. For a start, if Koenigsegg wanted this to be a 280 mile an hour car, they could have. But in a very similar way to what Bugatti did with the Galibia, they took the Veyron engine, and instead of 4 turbos, they put 2 superchargers on it. They could have just made it have 4 turbos, and it would have been quicker, but that wasn't what they were aiming for. Likewise with this one, they could have just put an Agera RS engine into the thing, and it would have been pretty much guaranteed to do 260 at least. But that wasn't what they were aiming for. They were aiming for something different, much like the Regera does. Now, as far as the spec, it's got 400 horsepower of EV power going to the front axle, 2 motors on the back, putting out 1,000 horsepower to the rear wheels, and arguably the most impressive part of the whole system is the fact that it's not a full EV, but instead has a 2-litre, 3-cylinder petrol engine, which doesn't sound like a Koenigsegg engine to begin with, but that 2-litre 3-cylinder puts out 600 horsepower. So, in other words, something that's putting out the power of a Mosler MT900 GTR from the spec of something like a Volkswagen Polo GTI. That's not bad at all. Now, the interesting thing about that is, like I said, they didn't need to make the system that complex. But it makes the car just set up perfectly for this kind of oddball direction that they're taking with its design. It has 4 seats, but it's not a 4-door. It has all-wheel drive, but kind of not at the same time. It's something of a performance paradox of a car, and I believe that if there was ever a worthy successor to finally truly beat the Lister Storm at its own game of being the ultimate 4-seater supercar, it deserves to be this, and Koenigsegg of all people shouldn't really surprise you that they could do something this impressive. Now, 4 seats, yes, 4 doors, no. As I said, it does have the scissor doors that you would expect from a Koenigsegg. It has a very nice looking interior. I actually love the inside of the car a lot more than the outside, to be honest. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not actually a huge fan of the design. It's actually the only thing about the car that I don't like. The back end kind of reminds me a little bit of a Porsche Cayman, and the front end a little bit like a Ferrari FX, like the one that the Sultan of Brunei owns. To me, it doesn't look Koenigsegg enough, and that might be a weird complaint. I'm sure some people would disagree, but to me it actually reminds me more of the Ital design Zero Uno, which I've never liked. But there you go. Ultimately, though, it's that combined system output, and more specifically the way that the car achieves that power, is what is an easy giveaway to the fact that they're not aiming for pure top speed. You don't put a 2-litre, 3-cylinder, 600 horsepower engine into anything that's trying to be the fastest possible car. Likewise, you don't use fully electric power, because it's still not far enough yet to give you that kind of top speed, not without draining the batteries incredibly quickly, and incidentally this car has over 600 miles of range, which is very impressive for a hybrid, let alone a car that has that much electric power. But as I said, if you were aiming for pure Koenigsegg level top speeds, you wouldn't go for this system. You'd do what SSC have done, which is just 1750 horsepower straight from the engine, even what Koenigsegg themselves would typically do with sheer brute power. This car is not trying to do that. It's very different to any other Koenigsegg, and that is what I love about it the most. And if Koenigsegg has their way, it's actually going to be the most prolific car they've ever built, with around 300 planned, which is huge numbers for Koenigsegg. So ultimately we'll have to see whether they do produce that many. I would certainly be happy if they did, and although technically the Lister Storm was already beaten as being the fastest 4-seater in the world by Brabus, to me this is finally the true worthy successor to take that car's crown. But ultimately, that's it for this installment of the Roundup. Of course, tell me your thoughts down below, and of course, stick around on the channel for more. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.